Normally I like to get here early and greet everybody personally, but I think it's better we get started because it's a big topic. We want to make sure everyone has a chance to get heard. A small bit of housekeeping before we begin. We have to be out of this room at noon so that it can be reset for a DAMA subcommittee hearing. What does DAMA stand for? Disability and Memorial Affairs. Disability and Memorial Affairs Subcommittee hearing this afternoon. So I really want to get to it. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. I'm going to keep my comments very brief so we have ample time for discussion today. Ending veterans' homelessness has long been one of my top priorities. Ending homelessness is like a top priority. It's a goal that I believe is achievable, and it is an obligation we owe to those who serve. Communities across the country have shown what is possible. Models like Housing First, coupled with programs like HUD-VASH and SSVF, have helped us reduce veteran homelessness by over 50% since 2010. I saw with my own eyes what we could do during the pandemic. I mean, that was an amazing thing to watch veteran homelessness actually decrease because of the Biden administration policies that were put in place. Every person in our country should have a safe place to call home. Our progress in ending homelessness among veterans shows us what happens when focus, urgency, and resources are dedicated to the cause. Now, I believe that if we were to give all Americans who are facing homelessness the same focus and resources we have given to veterans, we would significantly see fewer people living in the shadows or in the streets. That's what's so exciting about this work. It can become a template for the larger problem, the larger challenge. I fear this administration is taking dangerous steps away from what we know has proven to work in terms of getting people stably housed. Criminalization does not and will never work to truly end a person's homelessness. And I hope today's discussion will give me and my staff ideas for how we can best address the gaps that the experts, you all, are seeing in communities so that we can end veteran homelessness together. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so let's get started with the conversation. I'd like to go around and have every participant state their name and organization. Just keep that very brief. And so we'll go start to my right with John. Thank you.
Good morning, Tramicia Garner with Swords to Plowshares in San Francisco.
Good morning, Catherine Monet, National Coalition for Homeless Veterans.
Welcome back, Catherine. I know we've worked together in the past during our pandemic days, right?
Good morning, Ranking Member Ben Jeffrey, President with the MACV Foundation in Arizona. Thank you for having me.
Morning, Eric Tyers, Senior Policy Director at the National Homelessness Law Center.
Good morning. I'm Brandy Waller with New Vision Homeless Services. We have a homeless service campus in Iowa and a veteran-specific one in Omaha, Nebraska.
I'm Steve Berg. I'm with the National Alliance to End Homelessness.
Good morning. My name is Janelle Scott. I'm the Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs at the Council of Guard Public Housing Authority.
Good morning. Michael Famano with the Vietnam Veterans of America.
Good morning. Joe Grassi, VFW.
Great. We have with us, we're joined today by Congresswoman Maxine Dexter of Oregon, medical doctor. Will be joined later, I know, by other colleagues, and we have people still making their way through security. I want to turn to my very special guest, who I'm honored is joining us. I'm honored that he's joining us with joining the roundtable, all the way from Arizona, Ben Jeffrey. He graduated from the HUD-VASH program and now dedicates his time to helping fellow veterans. I want to start with Mr. Jeffrey. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ranking Member Takano, members of this committee, and everyone here today for the opportunity to testify. My brothers, James and Robert, and I grew up in a very unstable family. I was homeless at 12 years old, placed in a children's receiving home in Sacramento, California, and then foster care, and eventually adopted by a family member in Texas. After high school, I joined the United States Navy. I was forward deployed to the 7th Fleet in Yokosuka, Japan, aboard the aircraft carrier USS Independence, CV-62. And if you think the cherry blossoms look beautiful outside here, you should see how majestic they are all over Japan this time of year. During the Gulf War era, I served 2 years in 2 combat deployments in the Persian Gulf as part of Operation Southern Watch, launching aircraft off the bow catapults in combat flight operations 20 miles off of Kuwait, right after the liberation of Kuwait. I was decorated for my role enforcing the no-fly zone below the 32nd parallel over Iraq, protecting the Muslim Shia that were trying to escape the tyranny of Saddam Hussein. I've been through the Strait of Hormuz 4 times without incident. I was honorably discharged in 1994. I rarely used the VA after my military service. I became a journeyman iron worker and certified welder, working on structural steel and industrial construction projects across Arizona and throughout the United States. I built high-rises, Walmarts, churches, and even Navy SEAL training facilities in undisclosed locations until 2017. I raised 3 boys, Justin, Dylan, and Caleb. My oldest son, Justin, is an E7 non-commissioned officer and a gunnery sergeant stationed at Camp Kinser in Okinawa, serving in the United States Marine Corps with the Combat Logistics Battalion under the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force. Like a good country song, a relationship went south on me. She left me in 2017. I lost my truck, and my life spiraled out of control. I didn't cope well with the loss, the trauma, or the collapse of everything in my life. I became addicted intravenously to drugs. I lost everything I owned and eventually found myself homeless once again. For the next 3 years, I lived an off-grid Mad Max lifestyle in the Tempe, Arizona Salt River bottom, in an encampment with hundreds of other people living unsheltered in the woods. I was lost in a drug-induced psychosis and in the chaos of my own insecure delusions, dumpster diving to survive and flying a cardboard sign on the side of the freeway that read, "Need help, God bless." During the pandemic, my children thought that I had died of COVID. By then, my life had already fallen so far apart that I had been arrested for possession of drugs and placed into Veterans Court. By that point, I had nearly died 4 separate times from dehydration, hepatitis A, heat exhaustion, and a stroke. I knew my days were probably numbered, so I went to the VA and I begged for help. I'll never forget being told that I was considered chronically homeless, highly vulnerable, and statistically 9 times more likely to die at an earlier age. That's when I learned that there were resources available to me and that I qualified for a program called HUD-VASH. I was initially offered shelter, but I asked for treatment because I knew that I couldn't even function properly until I got the help for my addiction. The VA provided a community care, consult, and referral, and I finally got the help that I needed. The triage and the treatment helped me to stabilize so I could get document ready, and after treatment, I received a project-based voucher and was provided a studio apartment in Phoenix. I graduated from the compensated work therapy program at the VA while working as a physical therapy assistant at the Phoenix VA Medical Center. I later became a homeless management information system, HMIS licensed case manager, and moved into nonprofit project management, learning how to help other people in that same river bottom find a way out, especially as Arizona began pushing harder towards criminalization and encampment sweeps. I successfully turned my life around by learning how to help other homeless veterans get off the streets. The VA Community Care, HUD-VASH, and the CWT program at the VA saved my life. Nonprofit project management and a new vocation in life led to my graduation from HUD-VASH in 2024. I dedicated myself to understanding how the system works and how we can improve it. Today, I'm proud to serve as the president for the Mobilizing America's Commitment to Veterans Foundation. I serve as director of Veterans Services for Faithland Recovery Center in Phoenix, where I work closely with a clinical psychologist, Dr. Vaughn Williams. We've created a veteran-specific initiative called RECON, which stands for Recovery, Empowerment, Counseling, Outreach, and Navigation, a newly credentialed VA community care treatment program. RECON is the off-site clinical arm supporting Tanner Thomas Village for Veterans, a $7 million HUD-VASH village for veterans coming out of shelter. I work very closely with Executive Director Kerwin Brown with the Tanner Community Development Corporation to help build and operate this new initiative in South Phoenix. We believe this proof of concept demonstrates a replicable model because the transformational programming we've created addresses the full range of social determinants of health through a 10 pillars of support framework that restores stability, dignity, purpose, and long-term independence. We believe a stronger community working alongside the VA and HUD-VASH social workers will make housing first work better. I'm also the outreach coordinator for Veterans Voice of America, and I work closely with my mentor and colleague, Commissioner Chuck Byers with the Vietnam Veterans of America at the Regional Veterans Benefit Administration. And lastly, I served as the first lived experience chair for the Maricopa Regional Continuum of Care Alliance, AZ 502, our governing board coordinating the federal homeless response system in Maricopa County, the fourth largest county in the United States. At any given time, there are roughly 1,000 homeless veterans living unsheltered in our community. The military flips you on like a switch, and then one day flips your switch off. Thanks you for your service, tells you it's a tough world out there, hands you a DD-214, and then sends you on your way. Sometimes our veterans disappear from the system because we were trained that admitting that we had any sort of a problem was weakness, a dereliction of duty, and disrespectful to the uniform that we wear. I think we have a really bad habit in this country of thanking veterans for their service while we step over them on the sidewalk. Phoenix is the hottest city in the United States. We lose on average 500 people a year to extreme heat. Research shows that Arizona is losing about 40 veterans a year to heat-related deaths. This is personal to me. I almost became such a statistic. I am nothing short, ranking member, of a living miracle of how the VA system is supposed to work. I'm grateful to Steve Berg, Ann Oliva, the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and the people I get to work with today who value my lived experience and put me at the center of solutions to prevent and end veteran homelessness. Today, my oldest son is deployed into a dangerous part of the world where tensions around Iran and the Strait of Hormuz continue to escalate. I think about what will happen when he comes home and whether this country will be ready for him if he ever needs that help. In the United States, we've got roughly 35,000 homeless veterans. I think we could do a little bit better. I believe it's our patriotic and moral obligation to honor the social contract we have with those who serve this country and I'll spend the rest of my life giving back what was so freely given to me. I'm living proof that when this system works, veterans don't just survive. We thrive, we come back, and we will serve our country again. Thank you for your investment in me, and domo arigato gozaimasu. Isimu sen, sorry for taking too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. I have a question, just real quick. What this moment where the heartbreak moment for you, that seemed to be a big part of the spiral. How old were you when that happened?
I was in my late 40s.
Late 40s.
I'm 54 now. It was 5 years ago. It was in 2018.
I see. I was just curious. I don't want to dwell on that, right? So I wanted to get that fact out. Catherine Monet, I'm going to turn to you. You've been a great ally to this committee in our fight to veteran homelessness. Can you please help us further set the stage and give us an overview of the state of veteran homelessness in America? Go ahead.
Well, I can tell you what I know, and I can tell you what I don't know is, I think, the answer for today, right? We still don't have a PIT count, which is not the greatest. I think there are a lot of organizations, like you'll hear later from Adam Ruggie, who are trying to pull together numbers to get a handle on what we do know about the year in homelessness. I think we do know that VA housed about 52,000 unique veterans in 2025, and they say that's the most that they've ever done since 2019, which I think means that there's progress. There are things that are working out there, but we do know that there are too many veterans who are out there facing veteran-specific challenges that are also exacerbated by a dysfunctional housing market. You know, we're still looking at a nationwide minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. I looked that up last night, right? Still, since 2009, hasn't changed. I think I have big concerns about the social safety net somewhat evaporating before our eyes when we think about the changes made to SNAP. We think about the proposed rule on work requirements for Section 8. We think about issues around countable income. You know, yesterday at the Jeffries Roundtable, there was a lot of discussion around how we make sure that veterans who are currently serving are coming back to the right benefits. And, you know, we talked a lot about presumptions. Well, a lot of organizations talked about presumptions. I didn't, because that's not my wheelhouse. But I think one of the things that didn't come up that I'm raising for you today is that when you add presumptions, a lot more veterans get benefits, which is a good thing. But for veterans who are accessing means-based programs, that can sometimes be hard when you're looking at how that contributes to your countable income and what that means for your eligibility for a voucher or for food stamps or for, you know, whatever it may be. And so I do want to take a moment to encourage you, as you're thinking about expanding benefits, to also look at the other side and make sure that you're exempting veterans' income from, you know, income calculations, and they can still access the supports that they need. We know what's worked, right, to get us to a 55% decline on veteran homelessness, and that's being housing focused, right? Making sure that we're putting housing at the core of everything that we do, even as we're looking at recovery solutions or other things, right? Housing is always the end point and the destination. And so I don't think that there's a world where we should really depart from that. We can make changes to what we're doing, right? When we're thinking about how we retool the grant and per diem program, when we're thinking about doing oversight on how VA is staffing HUD-VASH, right? Or what they're doing with the homeless hotline. I think those are two of the most recent OIG and GAO reports that came out that are worthy of your attention. I also think that we could do a lot more to adjust what we're doing to serve the needs of aging veterans. I feel like what I hear from my members, and I'm sure you'll hear more about this today, is that the average veteran they're seeing has a cane, has a walker, is struggling with activities of daily living, and our systems aren't really set up to meet those needs. And so ultimately, I do think that even though we have stayed housing focused, and we should, there is room to test out some veteran-centric interventions and to do new things to get us the rest of the way forward, right? Like, we've been sort of at this 50 to 55% decline for a few years, and that's good because we're holding our ground in an environment where homelessness generally has not been decreasing at the same pace. But I think there's more that we could do to try new things. I will say that there are a lot of new things that this administration is trying. There isn't a lot of information that is publicly available on the new things that they are trying. And so I'm not going to say on its face that everything is bad that they're doing, but what I will say is that there are a lot of questions and there isn't a lot of clarity on their shift in approach and their change in personnel and the big shifts that they're making. There are two areas that I did want to raise today, and the first is Project Safe Harbor. I am so thankful to you and your team that you have really been sounding the alarm on the administration's purported use of guardianship, right, to address homelessness. We have some big concerns about that and think that that should absolutely be a last resort option, right? Like not a response to someone not having money to live somewhere. That's crazy. And there are some big concerns around how that can chill access to healthcare, what that means for expansion, right? If they ever thought about expanding out beyond the population within the medical centers, which I think was in some of the whistleblower documents that you were able to surface. And then the last thing that I've been hearing a lot about that I wanted to raise is homelessness prevention, because I feel like there's a lot of discussion that is happening around homelessness prevention, and people are sort of grasping somewhat at the low-hanging fruit, I think, in terms of the national discourse on prevention, where we're looking a lot at TAP and how you include housing components in TAP, and I think that's fine and well, but if you look at VA's research, right, the average veteran has their first episode of homelessness about 10 years after their military discharge. And so I don't think it's wrong to make sure that folks have the information about the programs and the support, and it's natural to look at prevention after we've done what we've been able to do, right, when we're thinking about people who are currently homeless. But I do think that we do need to build up a little more depth as we pivot into prevention, right, thinking about what it means to actually have a robust crisis response system, what it means to look at why people are becoming homeless and how we target interventions community by community to really meet those needs. So that's all I had today, besides to thank you for putting this on and for bringing together a bunch of really smart advocates at this table to talk about this.
Thank you. I just want to clarify a couple of things. When you speak about the exempting veteran income, you're talking about the average area income issue that disqualifies them for housing?
Well, for that and for other programs, right? When you look at SNAP, when you look at other housing benefits for anything that's being tested, really, and I mean anything that the administration is trying to put work requirements on. So I think I'm encouraging you to go broader than you already are. And I failed to thank you for doing what you're doing, because your team is doing excellent on the housing front, but like, go big, please.
And thank you. You didn't mention the elimination of VASP, but that's also a potential issue for people who actually own their homes, but are in danger of the mortgages get into some sort of crisis. The administration took away that tool, unfortunately, and the replacement hasn't been implemented all that well, from what I understand. And so that's subjecting people to housing insecurity by losing their homes. All right, well, thank you, Ms. Monet. My hope is for this to be a free-flowing discussion, but I'm hoping I'm going to be chiming in periodically with questions for our participants, just like I just did now, and invite members to do the same. If you would like to be recognized at any point, just raise your card horizontally and place it back down after you're recognized. The floor is now open for discussion about what is driving trends in veteran homelessness around the country. Okay, Mr. Riggi.
We need that support, of course, but the biggest prevention service is affordable housing. And if any indication here is that these signals are very concerning, and there needs to be an approach that will support keeping veterans in their housing, whether mortgages or rental or whatnot. And to Catherine's point earlier too about forgive me, I forget the word you used, but the benefits. You know, veterans who have 100% service connections, some of our cities cannot afford to live in housing. And so that needs to be rectified. That needs to be solved for. So again, we're seeing, you know, we have some major red flags. I do want to say one last thing, is that we are seeing major progress in certain states as well. We know that states and local municipalities are filling the gaps where the federal government cannot, especially around using resources through their state budgets to fill in gaps where the federal services don't. Minnesota is a wonderful example of this. If you're not familiar with the work that the State Department of Veterans Affairs in Minnesota is doing, it's worth checking this out, in addition to states like Maine, New Jersey, Kansas, and so forth. They're creating real solutions to help fill in the gaps where the federal cannot.
Mr. Berge, I wanted a couple of points here. When you said that veterans on 100% disability,
yes,
can't get housing.
Yep.
Is that because even at 100% disability, that's not enough money?
That's correct. Yes, for fair market rent, or for market rate housing in certain communities. I imagine the Bay Area is a good example of that, where studio apartments in the Bay Area can exceed $3,000 a month. That becomes completely unaffordable.
Okay. So it'd be interesting to get what communities are in that situation. There are plenty of communities where that 100% disability compensation is going to be enough. And so I would say that because of the PACT Act, because of the enhanced and wider eligibility and the ability of veterans to upgrade their disability ratings, that has had an impact on the lower homelessness lowering homelessness among veterans. But I think we need to get a grip on just what places we're talking about. I mean, it's going to be kind of obvious where that is and what there is to do about it. Well, thank you. Mr. Scott. Ms. Scott. Please make sure you turn on your microphone like she's doing, and then you got to kind of lean into and talk to it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
awesome. So first, I just want to say how honored I am to hear your story, Mr. Jeffrey. I think that story really demonstrates when the system gets it right. And that, to me, just fills my heart, and certainly as a military child as well. Hearing that story, it just goes so far and to show us what we're doing well and where we can improve. We saw a study come out in March of 2026 from the GAO, and it talked about how, yes, the referrals are increasing. However, we're still seeing that the number of effective HUD-VASH vouchers managed by PHEs are increasing by 12%, but that hasn't been matched by the wraparound services and the number of a proportional increase to VA staff that's needed to really provide those case management services that you talked about. So certainly would love to dig a little bit further into the referral challenges, but certainly the capacity at the VA and in continuing to match the resources with the resources that they have at the VA to be able to support those services that you received.
Thank you, Ms. Scott, and I was remiss, Mr. Jeffrey. That was really wonderful that you were to share your story with us, and certain parallels that I see with veterans that have struggled with suicidal ideations, and the story is that it's, the intersecting crises that sort of affect a person's life can bring about a certain amount of instability, and it leads to homelessness and also, I think, death by suicide. Mr. Ruge, the data that you mentioned that VA has not made public, has that been a problem across administrations? Is this something, or is it this particular administration that's not being forthcoming with the data?
You know, this is the first time that the VA has taken this real-time data approach, collecting data, monthly data on how many veterans are homeless at the VA medical center level, and they've been doing this for the last few months. So this is the first time they've done it. I can say, though, that things like HUD-VASH utilization, which I understand has improved, has not been made public across administrations. And I think that is a very big concern, because that is one of the key drivers for reducing and ending veteran homelessness. And I think understanding, making that information more public would be really beneficial to really understand what the pain points are and hold accountable.
Well, it's been no secret that I'm in critique mode with this administration. So requests for data are going to be seen from their point of view, through the lens of like, looking for something to use. But if we we could enlist maybe my Republican colleagues to try and show that there is our intentions are good, but we should try to get this data. And especially if it's been across administrations that's not been available, it takes a little bit of a sting out of the request, right? So, but thank you for highlighting the data that would be very important for us to get. And it's, I think my staff are taking note that this is data we should try to get. Mr. Tars.
Thank you.
You can leave your placard up. Yeah, take it, put it down when you're finished. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I was really touched by your story, Ben, and was wondering if it's not too much to ask about your experience out there. You mentioned that you were kind of forced to live out in a big camp in the outskirts. What were the impacts of laws criminalizing homelessness, criminalizing drug use on your ability to survive and to seek and gain services? Did those help you, push you towards services, or were they a barrier to you getting the help that you needed?
Got it? Okay, thank you. Mr. Tars, ranking member, a 2-point, one answer and one comment. For me, because we in Arizona, like last year, we had a year that it was 110 degrees for over 104 days in a row. And the World Health Organization talked about when it's over 104 degrees outside, the blood cannot rush to cool your skin and your gallbladder fails. And people on psychotropic medications that are seriously mentally ill or whatnot can go into heat distress and die. I think in 2023, we had 748 people die just from the heat. So to answer your question directly, the morbidity factor regarding extreme heat for homelessness in Arizona, 8 months out of the year, it's beautiful. It's a great place to be homeless. And 4 to 5 months out of the year, it'll kill you dead. To the point where you're walking around lethargic and people, you wouldn't be able to tell, but you walk around aimlessly because your brain is fried. And you just fall down at a bus stop and die. As grotesque as that sounds, let me transition into more of an answer. When I got out of homelessness and I became an HMIS case manager and a peer support, I thought I was Dr. Phil, a peer support specialist. And I put on some fatigues and some combat boots and I went down into that same river bottom and I did outreach and I learned how to get people document ready and I learned how to connect them to the coordinated entry system and get them qualified and whatnot for HUD-VASH. The most unbelievable thing I've ever seen is a city that I was involved in go so far to criminalize that everywhere you go is criminal. Everywhere you go is trespassing. We're gonna show up, we're gonna throw your stuff away. It was a big national news story. It goes on and on. It was the most criminalized. In the midst of Martin versus Boise, it was tremendously criminalizing. And the last thing I'll say, if I've answered your question, is that to me, it seems very much common sense that if the biggest performance metric for the fidelity of Housing First is the HUD-VASH program, then why aren't we producing those statistics? Why aren't we showcasing just how good this program works when done correctly? Because these VA social workers, these HUD-VASH social workers, as you well know, ranking member, do not have the ability to help as much as they want to. And if we could showcase how much of a success the VASH model is, then we could literally compel the United States of America to adopt the HUD-VASH model within the Housing First construct and be more successful because we have the data metrics to show for it.
Thank you for that. It would be helpful if we had if anybody knows about whether this data exists. What I'm curious about is if we believe that HUD-VASH is working, we don't have the data from VA. The sorting out of how many people could be helped through a HUD-VASH model like you, Mr. Jeffrey, versus those who are going to be chronically in need of assistance. I mean, that's a thing I can't get an answer for, so I can get my arms around a cost. Like, so how many long-term beds are we going to need in a facility? What do we define as the least restrictive environment? So we're not talking about criminalizing and sequestering people away in concentration camps, right? That's my worst case. I mean, the president did talk about, he smelled an issue in California. He said, I'm going to take all the homeless and put them in these camps in the outskirts of town. You know, blow through all the civil liberties issues, right? But, you know, just getting the distinction between what percentage of the homeless population do we believe is that we can provide the help and get them stable and into productive society. How many are we have to plan are really the mental health challenge of the country, of any nation? How many do we need to actually plan for, whether it's you know, long-term disability because of drug and alcohol issues, or if it's tied to more organic mental health issues that are you know, more physical and long-term. And so getting a grip about that is like, politically we can go, I mean, I think the people, if we tell them the truth, I mean, in LA, they approved an initiative to get more housing. They want to solve the housing problem, but then they see the problem persisting. Despite the fact that they approved all this money, you know, the people are running out of patience, and unless we come up with solutions, they're going to start listening to the more extreme voices who want to do, frankly, more fascist solutions, right? And so if we want to avoid the fascism, we got to come up with solutions, and we got to be able to persuade the people that we're going to go down go down more humane paths. So next is.
Let's go to Mr. Tars to do his scene setting, and we'll start back with Mr. Grassi.
Mr. Tars?
Yeah, he's going to do his scene setting next. Let's start.
Okay.
And then we'll start with everybody else.
Okay, Mr. Tars, I guess we're going to have you do some scene setting, so if you would, and then we can have a context for more comments.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Rep. Ticano. Thank you, Allie, for organizing this roundtable. But sadly, Allie gave me the task of being the downer and giving you all the many things that are going wrong with homelessness policy at the federal and local level for homeless veterans. We can all agree that nobody wants to see unhoused people living in public spaces, but the rent is rising more rapidly than wages across the country. Affordable housing and supportive services are being cut, and that means more people living outside on the streets than ever before. For every $100 increase in rent, homelessness goes up 9%. That is why homelessness is growing, and it will not be solved by throwing people in jail or ticketing them for needing to sleep. The only solution to homelessness is ensuring that everybody, regardless of race, class, or income, has a safe, affordable place to live. But despite that truth, the primary response of too many states and municipalities for too long has been to avoid dealing with the root causes of homelessness and instead to blame its victims and threaten them with criminal punishments for just needing to sleep and shelter themselves. And while criminalization hurts all people experiencing homelessness, Black, brown, LGBTQ, disabled, and yes, even veterans will hurt first and hurt worst. But while this approach of criminalization is not new, what is new is that this is not merely bubbling up from the local level in response to whatever camp might be on the corner at the time, but that this is now being pushed heavily by billionaire lobbyists, initially through state bills and now from the highest levels of the federal government. This transition began about 5 years ago with the Palantir billionaire Joe Lonsdale and the creation of template legislation from the Cicero Institute, which calls for taking away funding from proven solutions like supportive housing and putting it instead into camps where homeless people will be forced to go under threat of arrest and expanding involuntary commitments. Then, in 2024, the Supreme Court removed one of the key legal protections against arresting or ticketing people for sleeping outside, even if there's nowhere else for them to go, in the Johnson versus Grants Pass case. Since then, more than 300 communities across the country have passed anti-camping bans, and now Cicero is bragging that they are writing the same policies into President Trump's executive orders, and HUD, HHS, and the DOJ are threatening to withhold funding from communities that don't heavily enforce camping bans and expand their use of involuntary commitments against unhoused people. And last summer, Trump ordered federal law enforcement and National Guard troops to, quote, get rid of the people from underpasses here in Washington, D.C., and is endorsing plans for a government-run homeless detention and forced labor camp in Utah. Let me be very clear. Just like Trump is using increased law enforcement and detention camps like Alligator Alcatraz on undocumented non-citizens, he is already laying the groundwork for implementing the same on unhoused American citizens. Not being able to afford your rent should not be a one-way ticket to a forced labor camp. Homeless veterans are equally subject to all of those policies, so that alone should alarm those gathered around the table today, but the Veterans Administration has a special program implementing the EO that it calls Project Safe Harbor. This project promotes aggressively seeking legal guardianships over homeless veterans that would strip them of their rights and autonomy to make decisions about everything from voting, whether to marry and have a family, controlling their finances, choosing where to live, or deciding which medical treatments to accept. Placing veterans in guardianships as a policy response to a housing challenge makes it less likely that veterans will engage with outreach workers once they understand the implications of this policy. And once entered into, guardianships are very difficult and in many states almost impossible to reverse. If it took Britney Spears 7 years and a team of high-profile lawyers to get out of her guardianship, what hope does a homeless veteran have? Project Safe Harbor starts with targeting veterans currently connected to services, but we've already heard about them trying to target veterans who are still on the streets. Troublingly, as these details have begun to emerge, instead of acknowledging them, Trump administration officials have issued denials and misdirections, including in sworn statements to Congress. There are numerous evidence-based, less permanent, and less restrictive alternatives to guardianship that enable people with challenges in consenting to care to receive needed medical treatment. These include supported decision-making, as well as services such as assertive community treatment and critical time intervention that are highly successful in engaging individuals in treatment. Moreover, the VA, as we've heard, has seen enormous success of its Housing First programs, successfully reducing veteran street homeless by more than 50% since its peak, and with some communities even reaching functional zero, meaning homelessness among veterans has become rare, brief, and non-recurring. The way to end veterans' homelessness is to ensure adequate resources are provided to these proven methods, not by permanently removing veterans' liberty. Right now, there are several bills in Congress that members could be tracking on this. we need members to oppose an unnumbered bill in the House VA Committee that enables Project Safe Harbor, oppose HR 5163 that overrides DC home rule and increases penalties against camping in Washington, DC. You can support HR 4182, the Housing Not Handcuffs Act, which would restore the pre-Johnson versus Grants Pass standard to the federal government, and HR 4457, the Housing is a Human Right Act, which conditions some grants on anti-criminalization policies. And please be in touch if you'd like to be an original co-sponsor of an homeless anti-detention camp bill we are working on with Representative Frost's office. Being without housing at one point in time should not sentence any veteran or any American to the rest of their lives without the liberty to make the most fundamental decisions about their lives, to jail, or to forced labor in a detention camp. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Mr. Tars. I was hesitating to use the word fascist policies, but you're bringing reality to the plans and the evidence that there are well-funded voices, extreme voices that are coming up with solutions that are frankly fascist. Wow, that's a lot you just gave us. Okay, Mr. Grassi.
Thank you, Ranking Member, for holding this roundtable. Representative Dexter, thank you for being here. When I was assigned this topic by my director, Christina Keenan, and my deputy director, who's here, Nancy Springer, I said to myself, what can be said that hasn't been said before? And I also remembered someone telling me, whoever gives you a simple solution to a complicated problem is not taking you seriously. These are all big, profound philosophical questions, and they can be discouraging. However, I want to thank you, Mr. Jeffrey, for sharing your very inspiring story and also being proof that when the VA is fully funded and those programs are available, that can lead to success, and I think it bears repeating. Your story is a story of fortitude, determination, and it's very inspiring, and you're a credit to all veterans, and I thank you again for your statement. On the flip side, or in the vein, I said to myself, will despair and dire straits ever become non-existent? Well, on the other side of that, very inspired to have learned that due to successful VA programs, veterans' homelessness has decreased by 55%, amazingly, since 2010, and also another 8% since 2023. However, the VFW has become very frustrated and, dare I say, as a group, angry that the VA sunsetted the VAST program without implementing an improved program. We are still waiting for the VA Home Loan Reform Program, which was approved by Congress and signed into law, to be implemented. As far as I know, the VA claims that the program will be implemented in June. Well, we'll believe it when we see it. In the meantime, what is the source of our frustration, disappointment, and anger is that we've learned from reputable sources that foreclosures on VA home loans have increased at a rate greater than any rate that we've seen before, especially within the last 10 years or more, 10 years, dozen years. So how do we respond? Well, I can tell you what the VFW is focusing on. What we would like to see is we would like to see more case managers connected with the homeless issue. We would like to see those case managers not only assigned to homeless situations or homeless veterans, we would like to see those case managers assigned to those veterans who are identified as vulnerable or at risk for homelessness. In addition, we'd like to see the HUD-VASH eligibility requirements expanded, not only just for those suffering chronic mental illness, not only for those who are suffering from substance abuse disorders, but for any veteran who is vulnerable or homeless, we'd like to see that. As you know, the VFW is nonpartisan. We would like to see more bipartisan cooperation in connection with your bill, Ranking Member. We feel that that's very important. In addition, and I have 3 more points, I don't want to take up too much time. We would like to see the VA make quicker assessments in terms of identifying who's vulnerable, who's at risk for homelessness. We'd like to see those assessments and those plans for a solution happen within 3 days. We think that's necessary, and that would improve the situation. Also, we would also like those plans and assessments included in electronic healthcare records. We think that will be key. All of these things are very specific, very focused, and because the homelessness issue is so vast and so daunting, the only way that we can address it is with very specific solutions. If those specific solutions expand, then that is another way to continue decreasing the homelessness challenge and problem. The last thing I would say is that the VFW is, of course, like everyone, an advocate for expanded services related to the homelessness issue. We are supporting gender-specific services and for those services and programs to be expanded. And also, I encourage everyone, my last point, I encourage everyone to look up the VFW's grant program, which is called Uniting for Veterans. And that is a match program, a match donation program from national to the 5,000 posts that are across the country and auxiliaries who have donated, in 2025, donated $43 million to food banks and homeless shelters and other related community projects. So I thank you for the time, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Grassi. Do we think that the rising foreclosures are happening because they haven't implemented the replacement, or is the replacement, you think, meaning the partial claims program, that is it the lack of implementation that's the source of the problem, that we didn't have a replacement for VASP really in place, and it's not happening fast enough? Or do we think that partial claims is just not up to being the replacement?
Ranking Member, the VFW supported the partial claims program.
As did I. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes, well, my first thought was, since partial claims only covers 30% to 25%, depending on when you make application of the principal, is that why they call it partial claims? But then I learned further that the FHA loan is guaranteed 100%. However, looking into it a little bit more, I found out that that 25%, 30% guarantee has always been, in recent history, has always been the guarantee from the VA when a veteran takes out the VA loan, and that was acceptable to private banks and mortgage companies and lenders and so forth. That was acceptable, so that if they were indemnified 25 to 30%, then they could break even or end up in a better position as a lender. So that was acceptable. So although I don't want to make light of it, but you know, I would always make a comment about the nickname partial claim. However, that amount was and is acceptable to the lenders by and large. You know, real estate professionals and lenders may discourage veterans from using the VA loan to begin with for many reasons, but that's a separate question. Our anger and frustration is that the forbearance and the refinance options obviously were not good enough in the gap period. And we don't understand how you can sunset programs, stop taking applications in July 2025, and we still do not have the partial claims program implemented.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Is it Fimano? Mr. Fimano, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member and Dr. Dexter, for holding this and being here for us. Thank you very much, Mr. Jeffrey, for your very personal story. I think I speak on many people in this room in saying it was incredibly moving. And I'm glad you bumped into some VVA help along the way. Good to know our folks are out there still trying to, help other generations of warfighters. So it was great to hear. Mr. Ranking Member, you were asking for examples of where the HUD-VASH vouchers weren't meeting the housing gap and the affordability gap. A great example is actually West LA. The West LA campus, there were people that were catastrophically on the street, and there were people with very minor injuries, relatively, that were living in their housing over there. And fortunately, they started not counting disability income against overall income, and that helped a lot of the people get off the street that were catastrophically ranked. So that's just one question that you had, that it was a big problem over there where you would have people that were, they didn't have 2 legs, they were missing, 2 arms, and they were still on the street. Meanwhile, somebody who would have an issue with a hand or a foot would be entered into the housing.
So part of the solution is to not count, make sure that we don't count the disability income.
Exactly.
And so that whatever other income they're making, that the remainder would fall short of the
Exactly. It wouldn't price them out. So
wouldn't price them out.
Yeah.
So the combined income of their 100% disability rating money plus whatever income they could get, that could pencil out in places like okay.
And you fixed that issue.
Yep.
Pardon me?
You fixed that.
I know we've worked on that issue. We have. Yes, I know.
Like I said, it was fixed. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Garner.
Good afternoon, morning. Sorry, I'm on California time, so I think it's very early.
I know the feeling.
I think the one thing I wanted to share that I feel like we haven't talked about is aging veterans. So that's our biggest challenge right now that we are seeing in permanent supportive housing are veterans who are needing to age in place but without the necessary services and supports to do so. So we've heard a lot about HUD-VASH and that program being fantastic. The VA is a nationwide model, but it still cannot do everything. So there are real gaps in care and services to aging veterans. We know that older adults are our largest growing cohort facing homelessness right now because their incomes cannot keep up with the cost of housing. So we do need to see expansion when we think about HUD continuum of care, housing authority subsidies, including HUD-VASH. But we also need to wrap around services around folks so that way they can actually remain housed with dignity. We cannot assume that just putting someone into a unit solves the problem. It does not. And when we think about the work that a HUD-VASH social worker is doing or a case manager within a nonprofit, they are one person trying to solve the needs of that veteran, and they cannot do it all. So we need additional supports if we're going to think about keeping folks in their housing and not seeing exits prematurely to long-term care, skilled nursing, and other facilities where they really don't need to be if we could wrap around a base level of support. So I do think, as we're talking about this issue, we can't lose sight of folks who are simply aging, that need additional supports, that are currently living in supportive housing. And it's not everybody. It's about 10 to 15% of who we're seeing that really need that high-touch service model. And how do we really think about expanding that at a national level? And it may be beyond VA, who knows? This is something that is needed across populations, regardless of, if we're talking about veterans here, but just aging adults in general. We need to be able to expand support services to keep people in their housing. Otherwise, we're going to have a much larger issue and crisis facing us when we're thinking about how much it costs for emergency room visits, institutionalization, and other places that are way more expensive than the work that we do in permanent supportive housing.
Thank you for that. Ms. Waller.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to come today. Thank you for all the work you guys have done. As I said, I'm from the Midwest, and so our veterans are all experiencing a hard but a different hard from where they're at. And so I had the opportunity to start homeless services 23 years ago in street outreach. And I do want to thank all the work that's been done, because when I started, about a third of our unsheltered population were veterans, and we're down to less than 10% in our community. Doing this work for decades, I get asked a lot of times, is like, what's the one thing that causes homelessness, and what's the one solution? And I always say, you're thinking about it wrong. You got to think of it like an interstate, that there's so many different on-ramps. You know, your story is different than another veteran's story. But the problem we have right now is we continue to close down off-ramps, and we all put them to one level. And so doing this work, I have seen where people's like, this is the magic bullet. This is going to solve homelessness. When we built our campuses, they were saying sober transitional living. 2 years sober, that's going to be the solution to it. And unfortunately, we found out that that wasn't necessarily the solution. Some individuals did exit on that, but I'll never forget at my non-veterans campus, I had an honorably discharged veteran, and I had an opening over at my veterans campus, and I said, all right, we got a spot. I said, I could get you an interview tomorrow, but I need you to be sober. And this veteran, a tear went down his eye, and he said, Brandy, nobody wants me to be sober more than I do. If I could be sober, I could have my house back, my wife back, and my kids back, but I just can't get there. And that was a big gut punch for me. And that after that, we did apply for low demand through the GDP program, and I'm very proud that we did get that. We also are one of 4 programs in the United States that has a special need program for individuals and veterans with high mental health acuities. And so what I'm starting to see now doing the work, which I'm so thankful for those programs, but we all know the only solution to homelessness is housing. The only solution to homelessness is housing. And with the permanent supportive housing, it's very unique, like talking to other providers like at the Bay, is that they have an affordability issue, that, you know, the VASH vouchers aren't working with affordability. In the Midwest, we don't have so much an affordability issue, but we know any community with less than a 5% rental vacancy rate, you're gonna see homelessness go through the roof. On the Iowa side, our community has a 1.7% vacancy rate, and the Omaha side, it's 4%. And so what I'm facing now is, in addition to our senior veterans, is before we used to be able to kind of throw the veteran card to private landlords. Well, during the pandemic, 1 out of every 2 mom and pop landlords, they left. You know, and corporations have came and bought it up. And so I'm thankful that I have the per diem programs and the non-congregate shelter, but getting the veterans to the next place when it's not available is causing a lot of stress, not only on the veterans, but us as providers, that we have to have outcomes. You know, after 2 years, they have to go on to permanent supportive housing. You know, if we do move a veteran in that's suffering and struggling with addiction and was able to ask for help in our low demand program, and we put them into treatment, it is not a positive exit for us at all. If we do have a veteran that comes into our special needs program and finds out he needs a little bit longer care and then come back, again, it's not a positive exit. And I have a responsibility to my veterans and the people I serve. I keep saying I can't have conversations about them without them. And so when you're talking about Project Safe Harbor, I'm like, have they ever talked to a Vietnam War veteran? Are they, I mean, there's no way that they're gonna go and just hand over, you know, guardianship. But one of the big things is there's a lot of pressure on these veterans. As soon as they come into a community and stabilize, you have to go back out into the community. And I have the story of Alan that is very near and dear to my heart. Alan came in struggling with substance abuse. He was able to get the tools that we gave him. Thank you for taking the tools that so many individuals, and thank you for swinging the bat of your life again. And Alan did it. And he was able to get stabilized. He became a lead, a peer support in our program, and his 2 years was coming up. And so his VA liaison started working with him. He did, unfortunately, fail VA court in the past, and so he had some criminal charges on his record. And we're working. He thought he was gonna get housing. A corporation said no because of your bad credit. Tried another place, the door was shut. Around the 2-year mark, he got an extension. The VA representative kept putting pressure on him, and then he came to us one day and said, guess what? I'm gonna go move with my friend. and he has a job for me, and it's about 40 minutes outside of Omaha, and thank you guys so much. And his spirits seemed high, and he thanked all of us, and he said, my friend's gonna come and get me after dinner, so if I could just eat dinner with you guys one more night, I'll leave my keys on my counter. The next morning, my team found him, and he took his own life because he didn't have anywhere else to go. He found community. He found support. He found hope again. And because of some of the policies and procedures around how long they could stay, and here is a conveyor belt and pass go. And unfortunately, he is in his note, he said he didn't want to be a burden on anybody else. So I'm just, thankful for where we have come. There is always hope, but to think about some of those things too is that we have to continue to diversify programming, that we need all of it. And then that we also have to think about the pressure that's not only on us providers, that not only are we knowing stories, but we're also fighting criminalization. In Iowa, there was just, Cicero did drug-free homeless service campuses. So I would be responsible for any drug activity that happened within 300 feet of my campus, and I could lose ESG funding and state funding. And so, and like he said, if you—
And go to jail.
Yep.
As a provider.
As a provider, yep. As a provider, I recently was under attack by our city during a mayoral race, that they wanted me to be the most restrictive shelter because I'm a low barrier shelter, and that they were going to pass ordinance that I would have been the most restricted shelter in the whole entire United States, because there is this thought that, we are allowing people to exist, and we are not. But that is a big thing that we're facing. And senior veterans. Another thing with policy is our agency was selected for COC builds. We're building permanent supportive housing for senior veterans. We're so excited about that. We just had a 93-year-old Korean War veteran that was discharged from the hospital to his car that we brought into our program. And then we got LIHTC for our project, which is called Legacy Grove. And then we're gonna braid it with the COC builds. It was approved by our COC to go forward. Then it came back a couple months later and said, nope, you gotta make adjustments. Then it came back a couple months later and said, nope, gotta make adjustments. And still we haven't heard. We could have been breaking ground right now on our permanent supportive for senior veterans. And so, again, just thinking about the complexity of the whole thing, and then supporting LIHTC projects so that us as providers can get into the game of having property, because corporations do not care about our community. Their jobs are to protect their asset and make money. And so, again, when we used to be able to lay the veterans card, we cannot anymore. In places like us, we weed veterans in as opposed to weed them out, and that's very important at this time.
So I know this, real quick, Brandy, you caught me with, you caught my attention with the mom and pop landlords. Do you have a quantification of that, or does somebody have the data on, like in your area, you could go and negotiate with those mom and pop landlords, but it's much harder with the corporate landlords, right? So do we know how many of the mom and pop landlords have been? Do we have a history of the data on that?
So in our community, we lost about 40% of them. And I believe I heard it at the National Alliance to End Homeless Conference too, that statistic. And I think communities all over the country could say the same thing, that corporations, Airbnbs are kind of coming in and taking that. And when you don't have the housing stock for people to move up or down in housing, it gets very stagnant. And then the supply and demand, and that's what we're seeing in our community right now, is that it's no longer a person, it's an application to get into housing. So
we may not be able to fight that trend, that the monetization of all of this. I mean, we have to do some serious policy thinking about how we might incentivize them, but I hate the idea that more tax dollars are going to go and line the pockets of the corporations. But we got to find a solution for
And they're
this.
doing predatory things like charging application fees. I've paid $50, $100, $150 application fee, and there's no guarantee that they'll get in. I cringe every time I write an application fee, and there's been doing things where a landlord will leave open a unit and collect the application fees. And so we need to change legislation around that, because they are collecting thousands upon thousands and thousands of dollars. And if I'm not applying for these veterans to even get housed, how will I know? And so it's something that we have to do, but there are states that are implementing legislation that if you get a background check and it's notarized, you could use that instead of having to go. So we have to fight it legislatively. We have to fight the Clean Slate Eviction Act. If you have an eviction on your record, it stays on your record indefinitely. And so now with corporations looking at a piece of paper, oh, you have an eviction. Oh, you have bad credit. You're not even getting up to the top of the list. And so those are things that we need to fight legislatively to give the individuals and the veterans a chance at getting housed.
Well, thank you. You have anything you want to add to this, or?
I was the housing chair in the state of Oregon, and that was a huge thing that we were fighting. And there are legislative tools that the states can take, but I wonder to what degree federal legislation versus state. Landlord-tenant laws are almost always at the state level, so I don't know, though, for veterans if there's a way to protect them differently because it is a federal level issue. It is a really good idea for us to think about.
But this tax, maybe at the federal level, there may be something to do with how the taxation or tax incentives might work, or tax breaks that the Airbnbs and the corporatization of all of this. But the idea that ordinary people being able to invest in a second or a third or a fourth rental property, that they were easier people for you to deal with.
Yep.
And I'm just thinking about like enclosure movements and of the 19th century, right? I mean, there's these parallels of like how the big folks and all this tech is changing the local markets. And so anyway, I think we need to be thinking about things like that. All right, next is Ms. Mathis. Ms. Mathis.
Hey, thank you. Primarily what brought me here was a concern about Project Safe Harbor. I have spent my career working on housing and services in the community for people with serious mental illnesses, guardianship, and sort of similar coercive strategies have been a big concern of ours, and certainly seeing this push as part of an effort to align with the executive order on homelessness to seek to have hundreds of veterans in VA facilities, as well as others who are homeless, placed under guardianship as sort of a political strategy rather than, based on actual needs, is concerning. I think it is related to the issue of sort of insufficiency and inadequacy of housing and services for veterans, because it seems like the purpose of this effort on guardianship is to get people placed in institutional settings and nursing homes in particular, where those folks would not necessarily choose to go if they didn't have, if they got to make their own choices. And I would just say that to this issue of data, HUD-VASH has been certainly, I think, the most persuasive example, the most compelling example of showing the success of housing first strategies. It would be particularly useful to get the data that you talked about, but we also have, I think, cost data on sort of the costs of keeping people with serious mental illnesses homeless versus housing them in housing first housing, and particularly scattered site housing using a subsidy on the open market. And we have data on the costs of institutional care as opposed to serving people in the community. And all of these things did not used to be a partisan issue. And for many, many years, I mean, Housing First itself was first really promoted on a national scale by President Bush II's housing czar, by Phil Mangano. It was really a bipartisan issue. for many, many years, Republican governors and state disability service system officials were ones who really embraced community services because of concerns about cost. And so this is not so much about legislation, but about data. I think there are, and I can certainly share.
Ms. Mathis, I am perceiving a radicalization around, a radical polarization around housing first. It's become a loaded word.
Yes.
Some of the people I know on the West Side who support liberal Democrats are housing first is a lightning rod word, and that's what's concerning. But when I hear about from Mr. Tars about a billionaire involved in, that tells me there's money in think tanks and an ideology that's being pushed. That is putting forward a far more radical vision of how we deal with this problem. And so another question out there is, homelessness exists in cities internationally in advanced democracies. I don't know how other countries are dealing with, chronic, long-term mental illness, drug addiction, all this stuff, how they, what efforts are working out there that are consistent with liberal democratic civil rights values, right? What countries are succeeding in it?
Yeah, I think
what sort of models are there for lower restrictive environments where people are housed? Is anyone solving the problem that we can look to?
Well, we certainly, I think other countries are a mix, and there are just very
I see it in Tokyo even. But it's not to the degree we see here. But the Japanese are notoriously efficient at these things.
Right. But I think, we have had, I think, successes to point to in this country, and I think we have, to some extent, moved away from those successful models. So, no, we have not completely solved homelessness. We have not completely built the systems we need to have, but I think what you have seen is because people have gotten partway there, instead of kind of fixing the problems of inadequacy that we have by completing and actually building the mental health service systems that we never fully built, there is a movement to go backward. Let's go back to hospitalization.
All right, so let's, maybe we need to look at what you're talking about, where there is a critical mass that is building toward a workable policy, although it's not fully there. We need to have some signs of evidence, right, of all that working.
Exactly.
And we need to work here in the chamber with our, Karen Bass, before she became mayor, she's running into a huge barrier with, she wanted to attack homelessness. But she built a remarkable coalition around foster youth that was bipartisan. She worked very hard at it, and so maybe this is an issue that we can also build a bipartisan effort to get people to look at these solutions, right?
I think that if people understand the cost of what the alternatives are, they would be more concerned. I think that you now have people reacting to Joe Lonsdale, or and sort of these non-evidence-based solutions that they have no support behind them, but they've become so politicized. And I think the people that have drunk the Kool-Aid and started shifting away from, the things that actually worked and that were proven successful, I'm not sure they understand how costly it's going to be.
Well, the former chairman, Phil Rowe, staunch Republican, he said in public one time in a hearing, he opined about in Tennessee that jails are full of mentally ill people.
Yes.
And he was a doctor, and so he recognized something wrong there, right? We can't just fill the jails with mentally ill people. All right, Ms. Reed?
Thank you so much.
By the way, Ms. Reed, before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we have Congressman Herb Conaway from Jersey, also a medical doctor. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Conaway. You two jump in with questions anytime. Go ahead, Ms. Reed.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So Monica Reed with the National Fair Housing Alliance. I wanted to sort of interject another issue into the conversation and sort of discuss the intersection of fair housing. So that at the National Fair Housing Alliance, we obviously are a membership organization. We have state-wide organizations who are doing a lot of the on-the-ground fair housing work. And I want to just highlight in terms of sort of the impact of some of the administration's actions on fair housing enforcement, and particularly their ability to sort of serve the communities that includes those who fall under those 7 protected classes, and especially those who are disabled veterans, but also veterans who fall under the other protected classes. What we've been seeing, especially an attack on a particular grant program that a lot of the local fair housing groups are sort of a lifeline for those fair housing groups, that's called the Fair Housing Initiatives Program, or FIP for short. We've seen since last year a way to sort of eliminate that program, or sort of a really concentrated effort to try to eliminate that program, particularly in the budget. And we're seeing that again this year. We've seen a lot in terms of how they're trying to sort of unlawfully administer that program in terms of withholding the grants and the funding that's already been appropriated. And I highlight that because, again, these local fair housing groups are sort of the on-the-ground sort of advocates for those who are seeking housing free of discrimination. We are at sort of record levels in terms of the number of complaints that we've seen in the last 2 decades. Every year, NAFA releases what we call our trends report. We released the last one in November and are working on the one for 2026, but we're seeing an increase in complaints for housing discrimination. Disability continues to track as the #1 a category for complaints, being over 50%. And the impact of, if fair housing groups don't have this funding or they're not funded at all, their ability to maintain staffing, the ability to operate. Right now, we've been seeing them having to sort of lay off staff because of a lot of the funding gaps that we've seen over the last year. The impact is they're not able to serve the communities that they've been able to serve in the past. And so if you're operating with just an ED, or if your staff has left because you had to lay off everyone because you're waiting on funding that's already been appropriated but it's being held up, you're not able to be out in the community to accept the complaints, to help folks who are trying to be able to have a service dog or make modifications to their place to make it more livable for them. And we are seeing this sort of concentrated attack. So I wanted to highlight that, understanding the unique position that our organization serves in terms of fair housing. If we're continuing to see this sort of rollback in enforcement, we expect that there could be an increase in homelessness. If people can't get housing because they are being discriminated against, then where are they going to go if those local groups are no longer in existence, or they can't accept complaints because they had to lay off their staff while they're waiting for funding for, again, money already been appropriated. We've been in a cycle of waiting for funding from FY24. We are still trying to get groups to sign their contracts to start work under FY24 FIP funds. We are very behind, and so it's a present problem. I wanted to add that to the conversation because folks who need some help, if they're being discriminated against because of a disability or any other protected class, it's going to be a problem because we are sort of trying to keep the lifeline of funding to these organizations, but it's a continued problem. And once again, the administration in the FY27 budget proposal is proposing to eliminate that program again. We do appreciate the bipartisan support that we got in FY26, where funding was maintained, so hoping that's something that we can get in FY27, but we still need oversight on HUD and how they administer those grant programs to fair housing organizations.
Well, thank you. Oversight will be key. And what is this specific line item that we have to focus on?
So this one is called the Fair Housing Initiatives Program.
Fair Housing Initiatives Program.
Yes.
And it helps?
It funds those local fair housing groups at the state level.
All right, thank you. Mr. Retzer.
Great, thank you.
And I appreciate everyone's input here. From DAV standpoint, I was trying to figure out how I can make this relatable from when we represent the over 6.5 million service-disabled veterans in our nation. And then we're also looking out for the nearly 18 million veterans. And Ben, I really appreciate your story. I've unfortunately know too many that have been in your shoes, but I'm glad and very proud of your ability to share your journey. As DAV looks at this issue of homelessness, and I've listened to everybody and I appreciate everything, and cost, the federal investment. And Ranking Member, I know PAYGO is an issue that we've talked about and is very meaningful. And Mr. Tar, you had talked about what's the cost of war look like when we look at mental health. And we criminalize our veterans that are injured and ill with mental health as criminals. It's very alarming, and that is one of the things, unfortunately, is a downstream component of serving our nation, is we do have PTSD. We do have traumatic brain injury, unfortunately. We need to teach the communities out there, even at a state level, judicial level, to understand fiduciary and conservatorships with regards to our veterans. They are not starting out as criminals. They are serving and they're dealing with medical issues that need Congress and the clinicians and the judicial system to stand up for them to make sure they have due process. The other thing that we see is in the transitioning side of their service. We need to make sure all of our voices with regards to homelessness and the programs that are there are well taught to them about all the resources that are there for themselves and their families. But one of the things when we looked at the federal investment, I think we would all agree homelessness is one of the efficient investments that Congress could do, and they should sustain it. One thing that DAV's recognized is our critical policy goal with regards to PAYGO and offsets. And that has always been a barrier to maintaining veterans' benefits to move in the direction it needs to go, and to sustain programs that actually work and to strengthen those programs. And that's what I'm seeing here with our homeless programs. I know the great work that Minnesota MACV does, because I used to be a service officer supervisor in Minnesota in Fort Snelling, and they do tremendous work out there, and I'm always proud of them. As a matter of fact, I just saw them not long ago and was able to brag about them. But when we look at our veteran population, not just our aging veteran population, but we look at our women veterans, our Native American, Native Alaskans, and I do want to spend a little point to speak out for them. They are, of all the service-disabled veterans, our Native population are the most challenged. And their data, and we talked about how important data is. We do not have enough data on our Native Americans with regards to the challenges that they have with VA, HUD, and even tribal services. So I think we all agree data across the board has to be transparent, and that has been an unfortunate situation this administration. So as we look at these emerging issues that we've all talked about, the high risks, and we look at raising housing costs, we look at low inventory, even inflation, the impact inflation has to compensation benefits that just make fine increases, small segment increases, because they're based on cost of living adjustments that Social Security gets. So we look at many of our veterans, service-disabled veterans, are at fixed income levels. That is why they cannot even afford rent, let alone you look at a national crisis. It took me back to Veterans Health Administration. Our national crisis of staffing shortage is the same thing that we have within the VA, staffing shortage. The housing is the same issue. It's a national crisis. We are at points of records where we were at one point, not long ago, over 4 million home shortage for our nation. Our veterans are competing for that, but they're on fixed income. So when we look at this, we need Congress, and we will support you to eliminate PAYGO offsets. We need to make mandatory funding. We know that the citizens of this nation are backing our veterans and want to ensure that homelessness is wiped out. We are on the right trajectory, but the only way these programs will continue through HUD-VASH and SSV is to make sure funding is there. We should not be competing for funding. And that's the one reason each and every one of us are not able to take care of all of our homelessness. And Catherine, you had shared, what was it, 35,000 roughly we're at? That should be something we can obtain that. We have the trajectory to go, but we need to stay on course with the funding mechanisms.
Go ahead, Herb, go ahead. Turn your microphone on.
I was speaking to a developer who works in low and moderate income housing. And he mentioned that, I guess with respect to zoning, that housing is an essential service. Anybody know that it would prevent some of these local jurisdictions from being able to zone out housing if the status of housing changes with respect to zoning in the various localities across the country. Is anybody? It's an essential element. I think the word is essential in it. I'm trying to have trigger someone else's memory on this. But essentially, what it does is, if you want to, if a community seeks to stop housing or stops development, their ability to do that will be lessened by changing the category around housing with respect to zoning and other laws. I'll research it more and bring it back, but I think
Thank
it
you.
might be something
You can,
to think about.
if you can solve that problem, that's a big one. All right. Thank you, Mr. Retzer. Ms. Berg. Mr. Berg. Is your microphone turned on, Mr. Berg?
Now it is. Okay, thank you for coming to this and listening to us.
Mr. Berg, just one moment. We're joined by my colleague, Delia Ramirez, who she's been a heroine in the story of pushing back on guardianship. She's been she's been a strong voice, and I appreciate that. So go ahead, Mr. Berg.
Great, and I had the pleasure of serving on a panel with her not too long ago to talk about homelessness. I have a long list of things that other people said that I want to amplify, but I'm going to just do a couple of things. One, it's just we know what works. I mean, we need to be saying that over and over again. We don't have to use the phrase housing first, but we do know what works. And what works is getting people into housing and then using that as a platform for them to deal with whatever other issues they may have, whether it's a permanent long-term disability that needs lifelong medical care, or whether it's just quick help getting a job, whatever it is. That's the approach that works, and it's worked in communities all over the country. It worked in countries all over the country. I mean, when you ask, like, what are these other countries that are doing? Well, they're doing housing first. But we don't have, like I said, we don't have to call it that. The other thing is, this is an issue with a history of bipartisanship, and it's still pretty bipartisan, given the lack of bipartisanship on a lot of other things. I think when Congress passed the appropriations bill for fiscal '96, it included a lot of good stuff on homelessness that a lot of Republicans backed. And I think the VA committee and the appropriations committee are two places where you will find Republicans who want to do the right thing about homelessness.
You said
and know what it is.
You meant 2026.
2026.
Okay.
Did I say?
You said 1996. I was around then too.
I'm
it's like,
going back their ways.
Don't worry about it, Mr. Berg.
Yeah.
But it'd be helpful to understand the critical appropriations and the fact that, in spite of whatever the president's zeroing out in his budget, I mean, I was heartened to see, for instance, that that PEPFAR and the different that got funded, whatever, regardless. That there are elements of the budget that we can fund but we need to kind of know what if you just provide us the list of critical appropriations that we need to continue to work with our Republican colleagues on, that'd be great.
Right, and I will do that. We've got one worked out in detail for the HUD appropriations. And
Okay.
We're working on our veterans one, but I think we're on board with Catherine Monet's organization in terms of appropriations asks for that.
Okay, great.
And then the other thing, you said something that I think is very important to say. That we're an organization that works on homelessness overall, and we view what's happened with veterans as a model for what everybody should be doing about homelessness more generally. And that's like sticking with the basic approach of housing, getting people into housing and providing the services, coordination of the housing and the services. I mean, in places that have gotten good results on veterans homelessness, the VA, the local VA, has been very active about making sure that all these different resources, some of which are under the control of the VA and some of which are not, are bound together and put to work for solving this problem.
Well, thank you. And I wanted to say, Mr. Retzer, the way you framed how veterans don't start out as criminals, the traumatic brain injury, the PTSD, the public will buy that they are deserving. And we get the public's ear when we talk about veterans in that way. I mean, but hopefully it's an opening for us to talk about the wider population as well. I mean, they're going through traumas and all these other things. It's just not in a sort of deserving frame that the public will view a veteran. And that's why I view this as a kind of great place to evolve a housing policy. Looks like, Maxine, you have something you want to say?
Well, I want to touch on, because Mr. Bergen, Ms. Monet, I know you've been very clearly working on homelessness issues for our veterans, and as we see ideological changes leading to people having less than honorable discharges, whether it's their gender identity or addiction issues or other challenges, I wonder, first, Ms. Monet, thank you for your support with your organization's support for our Every Veteran Housed Act, which is just trying to standardize how we decide on people's eligibility for resources. But I wonder if you both can help us understand, like, what are the most important ways that we can address the houselessness issue? There are so many broad programs. Like, if we use a data-driven perspective, is it peer support? Is it, permanent supportive housing? Is it HUD-VASH? I just wonder if you can say, like, what is the number one thing that you think is in the toolbox that we really need to protect? No pressure.
I don't feel any pressure, because my answer is we need all of it, right? Because there are so many different needs, and I don't know, Steve, if you agree or disagree, like all of it plus housing at the end.
I guess in a appropriations limited setting, it's hard, like triaging is helpful. I hear that, and as a doctor, I feel that very much. Like we can't just treat one problem and expect all of them to be fixed. And I think, like, unless we have an omnibus package that magically is not going to get picked apart, like, how do we protect the most core issues? Personally, I think making sure everyone's eligible for the things that are available is one of the reasons we tried that with the Every Veteran Housed Act, but, like, helping us sort of think through how to prioritize the bills, because trying to boil the ocean is challenging right now, and maybe that's the wrong way to think about it.
Well, I would say, I mean, I do a lot of work on appropriations. I really understand this, like, issue of you want a lot of things, but you've got to make some priority choices. Personally, I feel like making sure that there's enough HUD-VASH vouchers for all the veterans who are chronically homeless. One, that the money's on the table to do it, and two, that the VA is charged with making sure those vouchers get used for the right, for people with the most severe kinds of disabilities. I think that's a priority.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am, for the question. In the VA Milcon appropriations package, we saw the VA get very well funded for the GPD, the SSVF, and the VASH programs a few months ago after the big shutdown. The concern regarding veteran homelessness specifically, in a way to answer your question, the concern is an executive order that came out last year, bridging rental assistance for veteran empowerment. Brave, compromising and separating VASH from HUD compromising and jeopardizing the obvious inability of Veterans Affairs to even have the infrastructure and capacity to handle public housing authorities and agencies within their social worker construct of VASH. That's all they are. They are an administrator that has social workers to help the veterans get connected to wraparound services, et cetera. But suddenly we're Senator Collins, I believe, in Maine. She's in charge in the next year after the midterms of creating statutory language to implement the BRAVE, which is going to what? Converge SSVF and HUD-VASH and remove the permanent supporting housing element of VASH, which for guys like me worked. It took me 3 years to graduate VASH. You know why? Because I was an overachiever, the poster child for treatment, community care, blah, blah, blah. But it took me 3 years, and I did the best I could. If you limit it to 2 years, and so you're ruining the entire thing. So it is, I'm gonna jump on the bandwagon because it's the truth. It is a fascist attempt. It is a fascist attempt to overtake best practices that we've all been tweaking on for 20 years to honor a housing first model that works. Housing first works because if you house them, it's cheaper on society than emergency rooms, court systems, institutions, blah, blah, blah. To finish, I think that the answer is fully funding housing first at a national level. President Biden did it with the All-In and the All-Inside initiative. We were on our way. We would have been even further along the way if we can keep the permanent in VASH and not reduce it to a 2-year transitional program. We're just going to be going back in history. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Mr. Jeffrey. Mr. Jeffries is the other one. Okay.
Jeffries.
Ms. Ramirez has something to add to the conversation.
Well, first, I want to say chairman because you're my chairman. Thank you so much for putting together this panel. And I want to thank all of you that are here. I see familiar faces that I've had the opportunity to work with either directly or we've had moments like this in roundtables to discuss what are the best practices, how do we hold the line for our veterans, what are we doing right and how much are we doing wrong and how do we change it? So just really want to thank you all. Look, I often tell people everything that is happening around the country is interconnected, whether it's the cuts to services that Americans rely on, the attacks on the VA, mass detention, deportations, and certainly the displacement that we're seeing in unhoused people, especially our veterans. It's all connected. And we've seen this administration violently target, displace, and disappear unhoused people by forcing them into homeless detention camps. Homeless detention camps. What comes to mind when you hear that? We've seen them weaponize the guardianship system to force homeless and at-risk veterans into treatment. And we know that immigration detention, homeless detention camps, and attempts to institutionalize veterans are all just part of this administration plan to privatize services, make more money, drive profit from the pain of our neighbors, line the pockets of corporations and campaign donors. And it's despicable. You see, prior to coming to Congress, I was the executive director of a homeless service agency, and I had the opportunity to work at this organization for 13 years and provide social services for unhoused populations, many of them veterans. And it was so difficult for me to be able to, as a caseworker before I became the executive director, look into their eyes and tell them the reality that our government is failing them when we don't actually prioritize a housing first model, where we expect them to live in shelter for 30, 60, 90 days, or in my case, it was a seasonal shelter that started in October and then closed in June. And to have veterans look at me and say, I'll see you in October again, as if we couldn't find them permanent, stable housing, that is a disgrace and a failure to our promise to veterans. So I want to look back at what Bondi and Collins' actions are about, this Project Safe Harbor, an initiative through which VA plans to try to weaponize the guardianship system to force homeless and at-risk veterans into treatment. We know that their actions are intended to appease the president. And last year, he issued this executive order calling for his agencies to force people into institutions against their will. Weaponizing guardianship and institutionalizing veterans will do nothing to address the root cause of homelessness. You and I both know this. It will actually lead to worsened outcomes. And one of you, I heard you say, what we do in the VA, how we address housing in the VA can be a model in how we address homelessness in the entire country. So attacking what has worked is not going to make homelessness actually go away. It's simply going to worsen the situation. So, Mr. Tars, and I know that Congresswoman Dexter asked a couple of these questions before, but for the record for us as members of the Committee on Veteran Affairs, can you tell me how homeless detention camps will impact veterans experiencing homelessness? And my last question after you answer, Mr. Tars, is for the rest of you. We're members of the Veteran Affairs Committee. We have the responsibility to legislate, to use oversight powers, and to use the appropriation, which is the rights of the purse, to protect our veterans. What would you say is the most crucial policy we should continue to fight for veterans who are experiencing homelessness? But I'll start with you, Mr. Tars. What would the impact be on veterans experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, and I don't say this lightly. My father grew up in a refugee camp because his father, my grandfather, fought in the Estonian army against the advancing Soviet forces in 1944, was captured and was sent to a Soviet gulag for 10 years after World War II. So, you know, I got into the work around homelessness because my father, you know, was a refugee, and I could see the parallels there. He grew up homeless, stateless, but I did not think I was getting into the homelessness world to be on the front lines of the battle against fascism. But here I am, because, as I said earlier, you weren't here yet, what is going on with undocumented immigrants right now is the exact same template that they are using, and they're going to start with that highly vulnerable population, and then they're moving to the next most vulnerable citizen group, unhoused people. And as you said, homeless veterans are homeless in the community. They would be subject to these same policies that the president is pushing through funding notices that require communities to heavily enforce anti-camping, anti-sleeping laws, to push people into these camps that they want to create. They haven't funded them yet, but they are working on it. And that is the design. And so that is one way that they are working to take away people's liberty, is to push people under threat of arrest into these camps or into warehouse situations. And in some places, Utah, for example, and now currently there's a bill in Louisiana where they would funnel them through a court system, through a homeless courts, because that gives them the window through the 13th Amendment loophole to involuntary servitude. And they would say, you are required to be in this program under threat of arrest, under threat of going to jail if you don't participate, but you have to pay for your own stay. And if you can't pay for it, then we get to rent you out to any community, any nonprofit for your free labor in exchange for giving you a place to stay. This is where our homeless systems are headed, and that's applicable to homeless veterans, to any homeless American, anyone who just can't afford the rent. The second they step out on the streets, if they sit down to rest, if they try to shelter themselves from the elements, that could be considered a crime that would get them into this system that would then result in them being forced to labor in one of these camps. So this is the very dark future that we are facing, and we are very happy to be working with your office and with Congressman Frost's office on a bill that would help to prevent and make sure that federal funds are not used to force people into these sorts of camps. And you know, I think you were asking earlier, what's the biggest thing we can do? The first thing is to do no harm. So to prevent this criminalization from happening, and then, you know, to protect these key programs that folks were talking about. You were also talking, Dr. Dexter, about the resource-constrained environment. That is an artificial constraint. We are in a system of organized abandonment where these programs that work, we know Housing First works, but it's never been funded at the levels to work. It's been set up to fail because people will say, oh, look, you've thrown all this money at it, but there are still homeless people on the streets. Well, you never provided enough funding to do it in the first place. And to your point, Mr. Takano, in Finland, we do have evidence of when you fund Housing First at scale, there are no homeless people on the streets of Helsinki. We know what works. There's great examples out there. It's worked here in this country, but it's this whole system that is, first we refuse to fund the things that work at scale, and then in swoops this quick fix solution of criminalization. So that's the game that they're playing here.
Yeah.
Ms. Ramirez, I do have a couple of, we're behind. There's a couple of people who've traveled long distance who I want to.
Absolutely. That's
we only
okay.
have 5 minutes.
No, that's okay.
Left.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but thank you for that question. I didn't come here, I wasn't prepared to get so scared at this event. But you have painted a vision, Mr. Tars, and apparently.
You scare us into action.
Ms. Ramirez, you certainly have, okay. So we're lucky today to be joined by organizations with firsthand frontline knowledge of what is working to help get and keep veterans stably housed in communities across the country. I'd like to recognize Ms. Garner from Swords to Plowshares in the San Francisco Bay Area, and Ms. Brandy Waller from New Visions in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Thank you for traveling all the way to DC to share your experience today. Can you tell us how your organizations are addressing veteran homelessness in your communities and ideas for policy change? Ms. Garner, you go first, and then Ms. Waller. You have 3 minutes apiece. We're going to go a little bit over into the.
All right. I had a 10-minute speech, but I'll trim it down.
Thank you.
So at Swords, we've been in operation for over 50 years in the Bay Area, serving veterans with wraparound services. And we work very closely with the VA. They are one of our largest funders, one of our largest partners. And we feel like their homelessness programs are really a nationwide model. One of the things that we often say, though, is the VA cannot do this work alone. And for those of us who operate permanent supportive housing, we understand clearly what some of those gaps are. I talked a little bit earlier about the issue impacting older adults, folks who are aging in place, specifically veterans. And one of the things we've done in the state of California is work with the governor's office to push for $25 million in funding to operate a 3-year statewide pilot called Veteran Support to Self-Reliance. So it's being administered through the California Department of Veterans Affairs. We call them CalVet. And it's going to have an independent third-party evaluation done by RAND. We are in the 3rd year of that program, so it is coming to a close in February of 2027, but the final impact report will come out in the fall of this year. And it has shown some very promising outcomes. And so I'll just highlight a couple of those here. Namely, we've seen ER visits, 911 calls, missed medical appointments drop by 60%. We've seen a 25% reduction in alcohol use, and twice as many veterans reporting that they are now eating 3 meals a day. For folks who are on medications, we understand clearly how their diet will impact their ability to have healthy lives. We are also seeing fewer eviction risks, 50% less habitability complaints, and stronger overall stability with a 97% housing retention rate. There are currently no models within HUD or VA that embeds staffing within community-based nonprofits to do this work. And it is key and critical for this to happen because we are there 24/7, 365. We don't get to close our doors because it's a holiday. We still have to operate. And we are often there at 2 a.m. when a veteran overdoses. We are there at 6 a.m. to get that veteran to that surgery appointment at the VA. So we need these services to really ensure that folks are able to stay stably housed. This pilot has brought to bear a variety of staffing models, and we're doing this across both urban areas and rural areas in the state to really show that if you fully fund supportive services within supportive housing, these models do work. We're looking at about $15,000 per enrolled veteran in the program, which is peanuts compared to emergency room visits or if that veteran had to go into long-term care prematurely. We are creating community. We are giving veterans a voice in their care, and we are making sure that they are actually taken care of with dignity and with pride. And so with that, I will stop there.
Ms. Waller,
I'm so sorry, did you say 15,000 per veteran per
Yes.
Ms. Waller, staff, maybe since I'm so close to San Francisco, but maybe we can organize a member visit to actually get on the ground and look what you're all doing closer. Ms. Waller.
Yes, so I think I spoke a lot to some of our challenges, but we are a grassroots organization. We were actually funded by a service-connected disabled Marine. I used to say veteran. He said, make sure you tell him I'm a Marine, so I do that. But I think what we have done well is we've been able to pivot. Again, like I said, who we used to serve is not who we're serving any longer, and making sure that we give a veteran every opportunity to get the help that they need. If they don't even have a pillow to lay their head on, how are they supposed to get better? You know, we keep talking about the criminalization of homelessness. That is the completely wrong path to go down. And so what our agency has done is we have changed our model several times, have continued to listen to community need, and where we're going now is into, we already have 14 units of permanent supportive housing for veterans, but we're going into permanent supportive housing for senior veterans, and really looking at the case management of it, because right now, it's gonna give the veterans a place to age in place and die in dignity. Like all the communities around here, we still have veterans that are dying on the streets, which just blow my mind, but a place where they could kind of come and have community. So looking at case managers, do we need them anymore, or do we need CNAs that will come and help them? You know, really looking at what will best serve our veteran. And then also, it was brought up female veterans. We did change our model to include female veterans. We had female veterans that were living in campsites, and there was no programs that were addressing them. So I think that's something that, you know, I'm proud to lead an organization that continues to look at the needs and continues to challenge the norms and make sure that a veteran, as there are many opportunities to get into homelessness, there's equally as many opportunities to get out.
Thank you. Thank you. We're constrained by time. We do got to hand over the room so that they can transfer it back. But, you know, I'm deeply inspired by your years of dedication, the work that you've been doing. I know that you focus on veterans, but I know that you're thinking about the much bigger picture as well. I can't elaborate much longer because we got to turn this room over. And I wish we could have more time, but I'm already thinking about the possibility that you know, I will hold the gavel again. And I'm looking, you know, to focus some attention and some interest and some time and understanding what you're doing. And hopefully trying to build some understanding with our Republican colleagues as well. So thank you very much for being here today, and Godspeed to you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.